She stood humiliated at the altar after being abandoned until her millionaire boss stepped forward and whispered in her ear, "Pretend I'm your groom. Tell us your city, hit subscribe, and get ready for today's story." The ending, absolutely unforgettable. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Cathedral in Manhattan, casting colorful patterns across the white marble floor. Jessica Monroe stood in the bridal suite, her heart racing as her mother adjusted the delicate lace veil that cascaded down her back. At 26 years old, she was about to marry the man she had dated for 3 years, and everything seemed perfect. "You look absolutely stunning, sweetheart," her mother said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your father would have been so proud to see you today." Jessica swallowed the lump in her throat. Her father had passed away 2 years ago, and his absence on this day felt like a hollow ache in her chest. But she had promised herself she would be strong, that she would walk down that aisle with her head held high and honor his memory by building a beautiful life. The wedding planner knocked on the door and peeked inside. "5 minutes, Miss Monroe. The groom is waiting and we have 300 guests ready to witness your big moment." 300 guests. The number made Jessica's stomach flutter with nerves. Most of them were there for Marcus, her fiancé, or rather, for his family's connections. The Whitmore family was old money, and their social circle was vast and influential. Jessica had always felt like an outsider among them, a simple marketing coordinator who had somehow caught the attention of Marcus Whitmore at a charity gala 2 years ago. She took one last look at herself in the mirror. The designer gown hugged her figure perfectly, its sweetheart neckline and fitted bodice accentuating her natural curves. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant updo, and the pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother sparkled against her skin. She looked like a princess, and for just a moment she allowed herself to believe in fairy tales. The music began to play, and Jessica made her way to the cathedral's entrance. The heavy wooden doors stood before her like a gateway to her future. She clutched her bouquet of white roses tightly, took a deep breath and nodded to the attendant. The doors swung open, and 300 faces turned to look at her. The cathedral was breathtaking, decorated with cascading white flowers and flickering candles. But as Jessica began her walk down the aisle, her eyes searched for only one person. Marcus stood at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his black tuxedo. But something was wrong. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched, the nervous glances he kept throwing toward the side door. She had no idea that her entire world was about to shatter. Jessica continued her walk, her smile fixed in place despite the growing unease in her chest. The guests whispered appreciatively as she passed, commenting on her beauty, on the elegance of the ceremony. Everything was perfect. Everything except the look on Marcus's face. When she finally reached the altar, Marcus took her hands. His palms were sweating, and he couldn't meet her eyes. The priest began the ceremony, his words washing over Jessica like distant waves. She was too focused on Marcus, on the way he seemed to be fighting some internal battle. "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony," the priest intoned, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed was deafening, and then Marcus dropped her hands. "I can't do this," he said, his voice cracking. "Jessica, I'm sorry. I can't marry you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her mind refusing to process what she had just heard. The gasps from the congregation echoed through the cathedral like thunder. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been lying to you. To everyone." Marcus ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, destroying its careful arrangement. "There's someone else. There's been someone else for months. I thought I could go through with this. But standing here looking at you, I realize I can't build our marriage on a lie." The bouquet slipped from Jessica's nerveless fingers, white roses scattering across the altar steps. She could hear the shocked murmurs spreading through the crowd, could see the horrified expression on her mother's face, could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching her humiliation unfold in real time. Who? The question came out as a strangled sound. Marcus's eyes darted to the crowd, and Jessica followed his gaze. There in the third row sat Veronica Hayes, Marcus's so-called family friend. The woman had the decency to look ashamed, but not enough to leave. The realization crashed over Jessica like a tidal wave. All those late nights Marcus claimed to be working. The hushed phone calls, the growing distance between them. It all made horrible, devastating sense. "I'm sorry," Marcus said again, as if those two words could possibly be enough. "You deserve better than this, Jessica. You deserve someone who can give you their whole heart." Then he turned and walked away. He actually walked away, leaving her standing at the altar in her beautiful white gown, surrounded by flowers and candles and the shattered remains of her dreams. The side door clicked shut behind him, and Jessica was left alone. The silence in the cathedral was unbearable. Jessica stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but stand there as her perfect day crumbled around her. Her mother started to rise from her seat, but Jessica held up a hand to stop her. She couldn't handle comfort right now. She couldn't handle anything. What happened next shocked everyone in that cathedral, including Jessica herself. A figure rose from the back of the church. She hadn't noticed him during her walk down the aisle, too focused on Marcus, but now he commanded the attention of every person in the room. Tall, impossibly broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of a winter storm. Alexander Richardson, CEO of Richardson Enterprises, and incidentally, Jessica's boss. He walked down the aisle with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. Every step was measured, purposeful, as if he had planned this moment all along. But that was impossible. What could Alexander Richardson possibly be doing here? Jessica watched him approach, confusion temporarily overwhelming her humiliation. She had worked as the marketing coordinator for Richardson Enterprises for 2 years now. Alexander was known throughout the company as cold, demanding, and utterly brilliant. He barely acknowledged her existence beyond the occasional nod in the hallway or curt email about campaign deadlines. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that made her pulse quicken despite everything. His grey eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something there that she had never seen before. Warmth, concern, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear, and whispered words that would change everything. "Pretend I'm your groom." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She must have misheard. There was no way Alexander Richardson, the man who had once sent back a 40-page marketing proposal with nothing but a single word written in red ink, inadequate, was offering to save her from the most embarrassing moment of her life. But when she pulled back to look at him, his expression was serious, determined, and behind that determination, she saw something that looked almost like anger, though she couldn't imagine what he had to be angry about. "What?" she breathed. "Play along," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Trust me." Before she could respond, before she could process what was happening, Alexander turned to face the stunned congregation. When he spoke, his voice rang out clear and commanding, filling every corner of the cathedral. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said as if he were addressing a boardroom rather than a wedding gone wrong, "I apologize for the interruption, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the anticipation build. "You see, Jessica isn't supposed to marry Marcus Whitmore today." The murmurs started again, louder this time. Jessica's mother looked like she might faint. The priest clutched his Bible like a shield. Alexander's arm slid around Jessica's waist, pulling her close against his side. The contact sent an unexpected shock through her system, her body responding to his proximity in ways her mind couldn't explain. "She's supposed to marry me." The cathedral erupted. 300 guests exploded into shocked conversation. Phones appeared in hands, and somewhere near the front, Jessica heard someone actually gasp, "The Alexander Richardson." But Alexander paid no attention to the chaos he had created. He looked down at Jessica, his expression softening just slightly, just enough for her to see that behind the cold exterior there was a man willing to sacrifice his carefully cultivated reputation to save her from humiliation. "What do you say?" he asked quietly, just for her. "Shall we give them a show?" Jessica looked into those storm-grey eyes and made a decision that would change the course of her entire life. She didn't understand why he was doing this. She didn't understand what he could possibly gain from such a public declaration. But in that moment, drowning in humiliation and heartbreak, Alexander Richardson was the only lifeline she had. "Yes," she whispered. And then, louder, for everyone to hear, "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander's smile was slow and devastating, transforming his stern features into something almost beautiful. He raised his hand and cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "I've waited a long time to hear you say that," he said, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent cathedral. And then, before she could react, before she could remember that this was all a performance, he kissed her. The kiss was nothing like what she had expected. It started soft, almost tender, his lips moving against hers with a gentleness that made her heart ache. But then something shifted. His hand slid to the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair, and the kiss deepened into something that felt far too real to be pretend. When he finally pulled away, Jessica was breathless. The cathedral had gone completely silent, 300 guests holding their collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Alexander turned to the priest, who looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "Father, if you don't mind, I believe we have a wedding to complete." Little did Jessica know that this moment, this impulsive decision to trust a man she barely knew, would lead her down a path she never could have imagined. And before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe for more. Now let's see what happens next. The priest, still visibly shaken, looked between Alexander and Jessica with wide eyes. This is highly irregular. There's paperwork, a marriage license, legal requirements." "All taken care of," Alexander said smoothly, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a folded document. "I had my legal team prepare everything this morning. The license is valid and filed with the state of New York." Jessica's head snapped toward him. This morning? How could he have possibly known what would happen today? The questions burned in her mind, but she forced herself to stay silent, to maintain the facade he had created. The priest examined the document, his frown deepening with each passing second. Finally he sighed, a man defeated by circumstances beyond his understanding. "Everything appears to be in order, if you're both certain." "We are," Alexander said firmly. He turned to Jessica, his grey eyes searching her face. "Aren't we?" She should have said no. She should have stopped this madness before it went any further. But when she looked out at the congregation, at all those faces still twisted with shock and scandal, at Veronica Hayes shrinking in her seat, at the empty space where Marcus should have been standing, something inside her hardened. "We are," she echoed. The ceremony that followed was surreal. Jessica went through the motions in a daze, repeating vows she had memorized for a different man, sliding a ring onto Alexander's finger that he had somehow produced from nowhere. When it came time for her ring, he reached into his pocket again and withdrew a diamond so large and brilliant that audible gasps rippled through the cathedral. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said softly, slipping it onto her finger. "She would have wanted you to have it." The ring fit perfectly as if it had been made for her hand. Jessica stared at it, watching the light fracture through the countless facets, creating rainbows that danced across her white gown. This was too much. This had gone too far, but there was no turning back now. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York," the priest announced, his voice finally steadying, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Alexander's hands were gentle as he tilted her face toward his. This time the kiss was brief, almost chaste, a performance for the crowd rather than the consuming fire of their first kiss. But even this simple touch sent electricity coursing through her veins. When they turned to face the congregation, the applause was hesitant at first, then growing stronger as the shock wore off and the reality of what they had witnessed sank in. Alexander Richardson, the most eligible bachelor in New York, had just married the woman who had been abandoned at the altar. The reception was held at the Plaza Hotel, as originally planned, Alexander had somehow arranged for all the decorations, the catering, even the seating arrangements to be adjusted in the chaos following the ceremony. Jessica moved through it all like a ghost, accepting congratulations from people she barely knew, smiling until her face ached, all while acutely aware of Alexander's presence at her side. He played the part of doting husband flawlessly. His hand rested at the small of her back whenever they stopped to speak with guests. He leaned in to whisper comments that made her laugh despite herself. He looked at her with an intensity that made her forget, just for moments at a time, that none of this was real. It was during a rare moment alone, standing by the window overlooking Central Park, that Jessica finally found her voice. "Why?" she asked, not looking at him. "Why did you do this?" Alexander was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When she finally turned to face him, his expression was unreadable. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters," she said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "You just married me. In front of 300 people. You gave me your grandmother's ring. You must have some reason." He studied her face, and for just a moment she saw the mask slip. Underneath the cold, calculating CEO was something raw, something vulnerable. But then it was gone, replaced by his usual controlled expression. "Let's just say I don't appreciate seeing good people humiliated by those who don't deserve them." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." He glanced at his watch. "The car will be here in 20 minutes to take us to the airport." "Airport?" Jessica's voice rose to a squeak. "What airport? Where are we going?" "Our honeymoon, of course." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "The Maldives. 2 weeks at a private resort. It was already booked for your previous arrangement. I simply changed the names on the reservation." Jessica's mind reeled. 2 weeks. Alone. With Alexander Richardson. Her new husband, at least on paper. "I can't just leave," she protested. "I have work responsibilities." "You work for me," he reminded her, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "I think I can approve your vacation request. Besides, what would people think if the CEO of Richardson Enterprises didn't take his new bride on a proper honeymoon?" The logic was infuriating because it was sound. They had committed to this performance, and backing out now would raise more questions than it answered. "Fine," Jessica said through gritted teeth. "But when we get back, you're going to explain everything, all of it. No more mysterious non-answers." "When we get back," Alexander agreed. But there was something in his voice, something that made her wonder if he was already planning how to avoid that conversation entirely. The private jet was another level of luxury Jessica had never experienced. She had known Alexander was wealthy, of course. Everyone knew. Richardson Enterprises was a global powerhouse, and Alexander had transformed it from his father's modest real estate company into a multi-billion-dollar empire spanning technology, finance, and renewable energy. But knowing about wealth and experiencing it firsthand were two entirely different things. The jet's interior was more like a flying apartment than an aircraft. Cream leather seats that reclined into full beds, a dining area with a mahogany table, a private bedroom in the back that Jessica was trying very hard not to think about. "There's champagne if you'd like some," Alexander said, settling into the seat across from her. "Or something stronger if you prefer." "Water," Jessica said. "Just water." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment, pressing a button to summon the flight attendant. As the jet taxied down the runway, Jessica stared out the window at the glittering lights of New York City. This morning, she had woken up thinking she would end the day as Mrs. Marcus Whitmore. Instead, she was Mrs. Alexander Richardson, flying to the Maldives with a man who had barely spoken to her in 2 years of employment. "You should try to sleep," Alexander said, not looking up from the tablet he was scrolling through. "It's a long flight." "I don't think I could sleep if I tried." She turned to face him. "This is insane, you know. What we did, what you did." "Probably." He set the tablet aside, giving her his full attention. "But it's done now. The question is what we do next." "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said carefully, "that we have options. When we return from the Maldives, we can quietly have the marriage annulled, cite irreconcilable differences. After a decent interval, people will forget and you can move on with your life." It was a reasonable plan, sensible, exactly what she should want. So why did the thought of it make her chest feel hollow? Or? She asked, sensing there was more. Alexander's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Or we continue the arrangement. A marriage of convenience, at least publicly. It would be beneficial for both of us in certain ways. Beneficial how? For you, protection. Marcus Whitmore's family is vindictive. When word gets out that you've married me, they'll think twice before trying to salvage their reputation at your expense. He paused. For me, it addresses certain business complications that require a stable domestic situation. Jessica processed his words slowly. A marriage of convenience. A business arrangement dressed up in white lace and diamond rings. And what would this arrangement entail exactly? We would live together, attend events together, present a united front to the world. Beyond that, he shrugged, we would be partners. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing more. The words should have been reassuring, so why did they feel like a door closing? I need time to think, she said finally. You have 2 weeks. He picked up his tablet again, effectively ending the conversation. Get some rest, Jessica. Tomorrow will be here before you know it. She lay back in her seat, closing her eyes against the soft hum of the engines. Outside, New York had disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds. Ahead lay the Maldives, 2 weeks of tropical paradise with a man who remained an enigma. As exhaustion finally began to claim her, Jessica had one last coherent thought. She had escaped humiliation only to stumble into something far more complicated, and she wasn't sure she wanted to escape at all. The Maldives welcomed them with crystal blue waters and air so warm and humid it felt like stepping into a dream. The resort was everything Alexander had promised and more. Their overwater villa stretched out over the lagoon on private stilts, accessible only by boat from the main island. Jessica stood on the deck, watching the sun sink toward the horizon in an explosion of orange and pink. Behind her, she could hear Alexander on a phone call, his voice a low murmur of numbers and negotiations. Even in paradise, the man couldn't stop working. The master bedroom is yours, he said, appearing beside her so silently that she jumped. I'll take the guest room. You don't have to do that. Yes, he said simply, I do. They fell into an uneasy routine over the following days. Breakfast on the deck, where they discussed neutral topics like the weather and the quality of the coffee. Afternoons spent separately, Jessica exploring the island while Alexander worked. Dinners at the resort's restaurants, playing the part of newlyweds for any watching eyes. It was during one of those dinners, 5 days into their honeymoon, that something changed. They were seated at a table overlooking the water, candles flickering between them, when Alexander set down his wine glass and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. I owe you an explanation, he said. Jessica's heart stuttered. I thought you said I wasn't getting one. I changed my mind. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I noticed you, Jessica. That first day you walked into Richardson Enterprises for your interview. You were wearing a blue dress, and you were so nervous that you called me Mr. Richards instead of Mr. Richardson. Jessica felt heat rise to her cheeks. She remembered that interview, remembered wanting the floor to open up and swallow her whole. I should have fired you on the spot, he continued. That's what the old me would have done. But there was something about you. The way you laughed at yourself corrected the mistake and moved on without falling apart. You had strength even then. You just didn't know it. I don't understand, Jessica whispered. If you noticed me, why didn't you ever say anything? 2 years, and you barely acknowledged my existence. Because I was your boss. His jaw tightened. Because I saw how happy you were with Marcus, how excited you were about the wedding. Because I had no right to interfere with your happiness. The implications of his words slowly sank in. All those curt emails, the formal distance, the way he had looked at her in moments when he thought she wasn't watching, it all took on new meaning. You've had feelings for me, she said slowly. For 2 years. Alexander's expression didn't change. I've spent 2 years watching you love someone else, someone who didn't deserve you. When I received the wedding invitation, I had every intention of staying away. But then I heard rumors about Marcus, about his affair. I couldn't let him destroy you without at least being there. So you showed up at the wedding with a marriage license, just in case. Just in case, he confirmed. I didn't know if I would use it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my sources were wrong. But when he walked away from you, his hands clenched into fists, I couldn't just stand there and watch. Jessica's heart was racing, her mind struggling to reconcile the cold, distant CEO she thought she knew with this man who had loved her from afar for 2 years. Why are you telling me this now? Because you asked, and because. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Because I'm tired of pretending. These past few days with you, seeing you laugh, watching you relax, getting to know you outside of the office. I don't want this to end, Jessica. I don't want to go back to being strangers. She should pull her hand away. She should remind him that this was all fake, a performance that had gone too far. But her hand stayed exactly where it was, her fingers curling around his. I don't know if I can trust this, she admitted. Everything happened so fast. A week ago, I was supposed to marry someone else. How do I know this is real? You don't, Alexander said honestly, and I can't promise you certainty. All I can offer is time. Time to get to know each other. Time to see if what I've felt for 2 years could become something mutual. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The simple touch sent shivers down her spine. Give me a chance, Jessica. A real chance. Not a business arrangement. Not a marriage of convenience. Just a beginning. Looking into those storm-grey eyes, Jessica felt something shift inside her. The walls she had built, the defenses she had erected to protect herself from Marcus's betrayal, began to crack. Okay, she heard herself say, a beginning. Alexander's smile was slow and devastating, transforming his stern features into something that stole her breath away. That's all I needed to hear. This moment would change everything between them, but neither could have predicted just how much. The remaining days of their honeymoon passed in a blur of discovery. Without the pressure of pretense, Jessica found herself actually enjoying Alexander's company. He was not at all the cold, distant man she had imagined. Away from the office, he revealed a dry wit that made her laugh, a surprising knowledge of obscure poetry, and a gentleness that caught her off guard. One afternoon, he taught her to snorkel in the crystalline waters surrounding their villa. She had been terrified at first, convinced she would drown or be eaten by some tropical sea creature, but Alexander had held her hand and guided her through the underwater wonderland with patience she never would have expected from him. "For you're doing wonderfully," he had murmured as they surfaced, water droplets clinging to his dark hair. "I knew you would." "You have far too much faith in me," she had laughed. "Or maybe," he had replied, his grey eyes soft, "you don't have enough faith in yourself." Moments like those were dismantling her defenses faster than she could rebuild them. By the time their 2 weeks in paradise drew to a close, Jessica found herself dreading the return to reality. Here, in this tropical bubble, everything seemed possible. But New York meant the office, meant co-workers who would whisper and speculate, meant families who would demand explanations. It meant facing the life they had impulsively created together. The flight home was different from the flight out. Where before there had been tension and uncertainty, now there was a comfortable silence. Alexander sat beside her, his hand covering hers on the armrest, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her skin. "My father wants to meet you," he said quietly, about halfway through the flight. Jessica's stomach dropped. "Your father?" "He saw the news coverage of the wedding. Apparently we made quite the splash." Alexander's expression was carefully neutral. "He's curious about the woman I married." She had heard stories about Edward Richardson. The man was a legend in business circles, a ruthless negotiator who had built his empire from nothing. He had stepped back from the company 5 years ago, handing the reins to Alexander, but his influence was still felt in every corner of Richardson Enterprises. "Will he hate me?" Jessica asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "He won't hate you." Alexander squeezed her hand. "But I won't lie to you, he can be. Intense. And he'll have questions about how this all came about." "What will we tell him?" Alexander was silent for a long moment. "The truth," he finally said. "My father has always been able to see through lies. If we try to deceive him, he'll know, and that will be worse than any scandal. The truth. Jessica tried to imagine explaining to this titan of industry how his son had married his marketing coordinator on an impulse to save her from humiliation. It sounded ridiculous, even in her head. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow night, dinner at his estate in Connecticut." Tomorrow. She had less than 48 hours to prepare herself for what might be the most intimidating meeting of her life. Alexander's penthouse was everything she might have expected from a billionaire CEO. Located on the top 2 floors of a building in the Upper East Side, it featured floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Central Park, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her yearly salary, and artwork that belonged in museums. "Your room is this way," Alexander said, leading her down a hallway. "I had my assistant prepare everything while we were away. There should be clothes in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom. If you need anything else, just let me know." The guest room was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was king-sized, draped in silk sheets facing another wall of windows. A door led to a private bathroom with a soaking tub and a rain shower. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase on the nightstand. "This is too much," Jessica breathed. "It's not enough," Alexander replied softly. He stood in the doorway, watching her take in the space. "You're my wife, Jessica. Whatever that means to us, to the world you deserve to be treated as such." Wife. The word still felt foreign on her tongue, like a costume she hadn't quite grown into. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know how else to express." "You don't need to express anything." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I meant what I said in the Maldives. This isn't a transaction, Jessica. I don't expect anything in return." "But you want something," she said quietly. "You want me to give us a real chance." "I want you to be happy." His hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch feather light. "If that happiness includes me, I'll consider myself the luckiest man alive. If it doesn't." He paused, pain flickering briefly in his eyes. "Then I'll help you build whatever life you want, even if it's not with me." She had no idea how to respond to such naked vulnerability from a man known for his impenetrable walls, so she did the only thing that felt right. She rose on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Jessica." He closed the door gently behind him, and Jessica sank onto the edge of the bed, her heart racing. She was in over her head. She knew that. But for the first time since that horrible moment at the altar, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like she might be learning to swim. The Richardson estate in Connecticut was not a house. It was a statement. The sprawling property sat on 50 acres of manicured grounds, complete with gardens, fountains, and a private lake. The main house was Georgian style, all red brick and white columns, looking like something out of a period drama. "This is where you grew up?" Jessica asked as their car crunched up the gravel drive. "Partly," Alexander said. "I was sent to boarding school when I was 8. Holidays here, summers abroad, the usual rich kid experience." There was something in his voice, a bitterness that spoke of loneliness and expectations that made her heart ache. A butler met them at the door and led them through a maze of hallways to a formal sitting room where Edward Richardson waited. Jessica's first impression was that Alexander was a younger version of his father. The same dark hair, though Edward's was streaked with silver. The same strong jaw, the same commanding presence. But where Alexander's grey eyes could soften with warmth, Edward's were cold as steel. "So," Edward said, not bothering with pleasantries, "you're the woman my son decided to marry on a whim." "Father," Alexander warned. "What?" Edward's gaze never left Jessica. "Should I pretend I don't know the circumstances? The whole of New York society knows, Alexander. The abandoned bride rescued by the billionaire CEO. It's like something out of a romance novel." Jessica felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she refused to look away. "With all due respect, Mr. Richardson, what happened between your son and me is our business." One silver eyebrow rose. "She has spirit. I'll give her that." "She has a name," Alexander said coldly, "and you will treat her with respect, or this will be a very short dinner." Father and son stared at each other, a silent battle of wills that seemed to contain years of history Jessica couldn't begin to understand. Finally, Edward's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Sit down, both of you. Dinner will be served shortly." The meal that followed was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of Jessica's life. Edward interrogated her about everything: her education, her family, her career goals, her opinions on politics, economics, and art. She answered each question as honestly as she could, refusing to be intimidated, while Alexander grew increasingly tense beside her. It wasn't until dessert that Edward finally got to the heart of the matter. "You understand that my son stands to inherit one of the largest fortunes in America," he said, swirling his cognac. "There are many women who would go to great lengths to secure such a position." "Father, that's enough," Alexander snapped. But Jessica laid a hand on his arm, calming him. "It's a fair question," she said. "Mr. Richardson, I had no idea your son had feelings for me until he told me in the Maldives. Before that, I thought we were engaged in a mutual act of kindness, nothing more. If you're asking whether I married him for his money, the answer is no. I was perfectly prepared to walk away with nothing but the clothes on my back, and yet you didn't walk away." "No," Jessica admitted. "I didn't, because somewhere along the way I started to see the man behind the CEO, and I wanted to know more." Edward studied her for a long moment. "You love him," he said finally. It wasn't a question. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Did she love Alexander? She cared for him, certainly. She was attracted to him, undeniably. But love was a word she had used too carelessly before, with Marcus, and look where that had gotten her. "I'm falling for him," she said carefully. "Whether that becomes love, I think that's something we're both still figuring out." Edward nodded slowly. Then, to Jessica's astonishment, his stern expression softened into something almost approving. "An honest answer, I appreciate that." He turned to Alexander. "She'll do." Alexander let out a breath Jessica hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Was that your version of giving us your blessing? Don't push it." But there was a warmth in Edward's voice that hadn't been there before. "Now tell me about this merger you've been working on. I hear there are complications." The rest of the evening passed in easier conversation, business talk that Jessica only half followed. But she noticed the way Alexander's shoulders had relaxed, the way the tension had drained from his jaw. His father's approval, however grudgingly given, clearly meant more to him than he would ever admit. On the drive back to the city, Alexander reached over and took her hand in the darkness of the car. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For being yourself? For not backing down from him?" His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "My mother died when I was 6. Since then, my father has been the only family I have. His opinion matters to me, even when I wish it didn't." "He loves you," Jessica said. "I could see it underneath all the gruffness. He just doesn't know how to show it." "That's very generous considering he spent half the evening interrogating you like a hostile witness." She laughed. "I've survived worse. My grandmother used to play poker professionally. Compared to her Sunday dinners, your father was practically welcoming." Alexander's laugh was surprised and genuine, a sound she was growing to treasure. "I think I would have liked your grandmother." "She would have eaten you alive," Jessica said fondly. "But in the best way." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, hands intertwined. And when they reached the penthouse and said goodnight at her bedroom door, Jessica found herself reluctant to let go. "Stay," she said before she could lose her nerve. "Just stay. I don't want to sleep alone tonight." Alexander's eyes searched her face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He followed her into the room, and they lay down together on the silk sheets, fully clothed, her head resting on his chest as his arm wrapped around her shoulders. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, a rhythm that matched her own. "Tell me something about you," she murmured. "Something no one else knows." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I collect first editions, antique books. I have a whole room in this apartment full of them. Austen, Dickens, Bronte. Everyone thinks I'm this cold, calculating businessman, but I spend my evenings reading stories about love and adventure." Jessica smiled against his chest. That might be the most romantic thing I've ever heard. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain. She fell asleep to the sound of his voice, safe in his arms, wondering how she had gotten so lucky to find herself here. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Jessica returned to work at Richardson Enterprises, but things were different now. Where before she had been invisible, now she was the boss's wife. Some colleagues treated her with newfound respect, others with barely concealed jealousy. Few, the ones who had known her before, remained genuine friends who teased her mercilessly about her fairy tale romance. She and Alexander had agreed to take things slow. Separate bedrooms, proper dates, a real courtship despite the rings already on their fingers. He took her to gallery openings and charity galas, but also to hole-in-the-wall restaurants in Brooklyn, to jazz clubs in Harlem, to bookshops where they spent hours debating the merits of various authors. She learned that he took his coffee black, that he hated mushrooms with a passion, that he had a secret talent for piano that he only indulged late at night when he thought no one was listening. And he learned about her. The grandmother who raised her after her mother's disappearance, the father who had worked himself to death to give her a better life, the dreams she had put aside, the ambitions she had buried, the woman she was still becoming. What happened next threatened to destroy everything they had built. It started with a photograph. Jessica was in her office, reviewing campaign materials for the company's latest product launch, when her phone buzzed with a news alert. She almost ignored it, too focused on her work to care about whatever celebrity scandal or political drama was dominating the headlines. But then she saw Alexander's name. The article was from a prominent gossip site, the kind that thrived on destroying reputations and manufacturing controversy. The headline screamed, "Richardson's marriage a sham." Photos reveal CEO's secret meetings with ex-girlfriend. Beneath the headline were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Alexander in what appeared to be a heated conversation with a beautiful blonde woman outside a restaurant. The same woman climbing into his car, the two of them walking together through Central Park, standing close, her hand on his arm. The article claimed that Alexander had been seeing Victoria Chen, his college girlfriend, throughout his engagement and marriage to Jessica. It suggested that the wedding had been nothing but a publicity stunt, a way for Alexander to generate sympathy and headlines while continuing his true relationship in secret. Jessica's hands trembled as she scrolled through the photos. The dates stamped on the images were from the past 2 weeks, while she had been at work, believing everything was finally falling into place. She should call him. She should give him a chance to explain. But the voice in her head, the one that still remembered Marcus's betrayal, whispered that she already knew the answer. Men like Alexander Richardson didn't change. They just got better at hiding. Her office door burst open, and Alexander himself strode in, his face pale beneath his tan. "You've seen it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Who is she?" Jessica's voice was ice. "Who is Victoria Chen?" Alexander closed the door behind him and leaned against it, looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. "She's my ex-girlfriend from college. We dated for 2 years before she left me for a tech billionaire in California. And now she's back." "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair. "She contacted me 3 weeks ago. Said she'd made a mistake, that she still had feelings for me, that she wanted to try again." The words hit Jessica like physical blows. 3 weeks. He had been meeting with this woman for 3 weeks while she had been falling for him, while she had been starting to believe in their future. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because there was nothing to tell." He pushed off the door and moved toward her, but stopped when she flinched away. "Jessica, I met with her to make it clear that I wasn't interested, that I'm married now, that my feelings for her died a long time ago." "And the photos? The ones of you walking through the park, her hand on your arm?" "Staged." His jaw tightened. "I should have seen it. Victoria was always good at manipulation. She must have had someone following us, waiting for the right angle, the right moment, to make innocent meetings look like something else." "Why would she do that?" "Because she's not used to being told no." Alexander's laugh was bitter. "Victoria Chen gets what she wants always. When I refused to leave you for her, She decided that if she couldn't have me, she would destroy what I had. Jessica wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to accept his explanation and move on. But the wound of Marcus's betrayal was still too fresh, the scar tissue still too tender. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked quietly. "How do I know this isn't just a better lie?" "You don't." The honesty in his voice was raw. "I can't prove a negative, Jessica. I can't show you the things that didn't happen. All I can do is tell you that I haven't touched another woman since the day I married you, that I haven't wanted to, that every night lying in bed knowing you're just down the hall is both the greatest joy and the sweetest torture I've ever known." He took another step toward her, and this time she didn't pull away. "I know you've been hurt before. I know Marcus destroyed your ability to trust, but I'm not him, Jessica. I will never be him. If you give me the chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." The sincerity in his eyes was impossible to fake. She had learned to recognize his masks, his walls, and right now there were none. He was completely exposed, completely vulnerable, laying his heart at her feet and waiting to see if she would crush it. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think about this." "Take all the time you need." He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "But please don't make any decisions until you've heard the whole story. I have evidence, Jessica. Emails where Victoria admits her plan, recordings of her threatening to ruin me if I don't leave you." "You have recordings?" "I started recording our conversations after the second meeting, when she made it clear she wasn't going to take no for an answer." He pulled out his phone. "Listen, and then decide what you believe." What Jessica heard over the next 10 minutes made her blood run cold. Victoria's voice dripping with venom, detailing exactly how she planned to destroy Alexander's marriage, how she had hired photographers to follow them, how she had connections at every major media outlet who would print whatever she told them, how she had done this before, to other men who had dared to reject her, and how she would do it again unless Alexander gave her what she wanted. By the time the final recording ended, Jessica was shaking. "Why didn't you go to the police?" she demanded. "This is harassment, maybe even blackmail." "Because I wanted to handle it quietly. I thought I could reason with her, convince her to move on." Alexander's expression was grim. "I was wrong, and now you're paying the price for my mistake. What do we do now?" "Now we fight back." There was steel in his voice. "I've already contacted my lawyers. We're preparing a defamation suit against the media outlets that published the story, and Victoria." His eyes darkened. "Victoria will learn that no one threatens my family." My family. The word sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. She was his family now, whether she had fully accepted it or not. "I believe you," she said slowly. "I don't know if I'm making another mistake, but I believe you." The relief that flooded Alexander's face was almost painful to witness. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, his heart pounding beneath her ear. "Thank you," he breathed into her hair. "Thank you for trusting me." The scandal raged for another week before Alexander's lawyers put an end to it. Retractions were issued. Apologies were published. Victoria Chen quietly disappeared from New York. Rumor had it to avoid the lawsuit that Alexander had made clear he would pursue to the fullest extent of the law. But the damage had already been done. Not to their reputation, which emerged largely unscathed thanks to Alexander's swift action, but to Jessica's fragile sense of security. The incident had reminded her that their world was full of people who would do anything to tear them apart. That happiness, for people like them, would always come with a target on its back. "I'm sorry," Alexander said one night as they sat together on the rooftop terrace of the penthouse. The lights of Manhattan spread out below them like fallen stars. "I should have told you about Victoria from the beginning. I should have trusted you with the truth. Why didn't you?" He was silent for a long moment. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew another woman was pursuing me, you would use it as an excuse to leave, that you would decide the complications weren't worth it. That's not a decision for you to make for me." "I know." He turned to face her, his grey eyes reflecting the city lights. "I'm not used to this, Jessica. Having someone I want to protect, someone whose opinion matters more than my own. I've spent my whole life making decisions alone, answering to no one but myself. Learning to be a partner, a husband. It's harder than any business deal I've ever negotiated. Jessica reached out and took his hand. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for honesty, for inclusion. Whatever comes next, I want to face it together, not find out about it from a tabloid headline. Together, Alexander agreed. From now on, no more secrets. No more secrets. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and sweet, a promise sealed. And when they finally pulled apart, something had shifted between them. The last of the walls had crumbled. The last of the defenses had fallen. They were in this together now, for better or for worse. The gala was the social event of the season. Hosted by the Richardson Foundation, Alexander's charitable arm that focused on education and poverty relief, it brought together the wealthiest and most influential people in New York for an evening of champagne, dancing, and silent auctions. Jessica had spent hours preparing. Her gown was emerald green, designed to complement her dark hair and bring out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. Diamonds dripped from her ears and throat, loaned from Alexander's collection of family jewelry. When she descended the penthouse stairs to where he waited, the look in his eyes made every moment of preparation worth it. "You're stunning," he said, his voice rough. "You're not so bad yourself." He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, all clean lines and understated elegance. Together, they looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of power couple that dominated society pages and inspired envy. The gala itself was a blur of faces and handshakes and small talk. Jessica had grown better at navigating these events, but she still found them exhausting, all that performance and pretense wrapped up in silk and diamonds. It was near the end of the evening, as the band played a slow waltz and couples drifted onto the dance floor, that she saw them. Marcus Whitmore and Veronica Hayes, dancing together as if they belonged here, as if they had any right to be in the same room as Jessica after what they had done. Alexander followed her gaze and his arm tightened around her waist. "I didn't know they were on the guest list. One of the foundation board members must have invited them." "It's fine." Jessica forced herself to breathe. "They don't matter. None of that matters anymore." But Marcus had seen her now. He murmured something to Veronica, then broke away from the dance floor and headed straight toward them. "Jessica." His voice was smooth, practiced, as if greeting an old acquaintance rather than the woman he had humiliated in front of 300 people. "You look well. Marriage seems to agree with you." "Marcus," she kept her tone neutral, "I didn't expect to see you here. The Richardson Foundation does important work." He glanced at Alexander with barely concealed disdain. "Though I suppose you have a more personal connection now." Alexander said nothing, but Jessica felt the tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. One wrong word from Marcus, and this evening would end very differently than planned. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked wearily. His expression shifted, the mask of casual confidence slipping to reveal something almost vulnerable beneath. "I wanted to apologize. What I did at the wedding, it was unforgivable. I know that, but I've thought about it every day since, and I needed you to know that I'm sorry." "You're sorry?" The laugh that escaped her was hollow. "You destroyed me in front of everyone we knew. You walked away without a backward glance. And now you're sorry?" "I was a coward." Marcus's voice dropped. "I knew it was wrong, knew I should have ended things privately weeks before, but I kept putting it off, telling myself I could go through with it, that what I felt for Veronica would pass." He glanced back at where his current girlfriend stood watching, her beautiful face twisted with anxiety. "It didn't pass, and in the end I hurt everyone." Jessica studied the man she had once loved, once planned to spend her life with. He looked older than she remembered, lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by something smaller, defeated. She realized with a shock that left her breathless that she felt nothing, not anger, not hurt, not even satisfaction at his obvious misery, just nothing. "I forgive you," she heard herself say, and she meant it. "Not for your sake, Marcus, for mine. I'm done carrying around anger at someone who doesn't deserve that much of my energy. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting this response. Thank you, he said finally. I hope you find happiness, Jessica. Real happiness. I already have. She looked up at Alexander, at this man who had turned her worst day into the beginning of something beautiful. I already have. When Marcus walked away, Jessica felt something release in her chest. A weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying finally lifted. Alexander's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Are you okay? I'm better than okay. She turned in his embrace to face him. I'm free. His kiss was fierce and claiming, right there in the middle of the gala, with half of New York society watching. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with an intensity that made her knees weak. Dance with me, he said. It wasn't a request. They moved onto the floor as the band shifted into a new song, something slow and romantic. Alexander held her close, one hand at the small of her back, the other clasped with hers over his heart. I love you, he said quietly, the words almost lost in the music. I've loved you since the day you mispronounced my name. I'll love you until the day I die. Jessica's heart stopped, then started again at twice its normal speed. They had been dancing around this moment for weeks, both afraid to be the first to say it, both waiting for the other to take the risk. I love you too, she whispered back. I think I've loved you since the moment you offered to save me. I was just too scared to admit it. Alexander's smile was brilliant, transforming his stern features into something almost boyish. No more fear, he said. No more secrets. Just us, together, figuring out the rest as we go. Just us, she agreed. As they swayed together beneath the crystal chandeliers, surrounded by people who would gossip about them tomorrow, Jessica realized that she had found something she never expected to find again. Not just love, but hope. Not just a partner, but a home. And she was never letting go. 3 months into their marriage, Jessica received the phone call that changed everything. She was in a meeting at Richardson Enterprises when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, she would have ignored it, but something made her step out of the conference room to answer. Is this Jessica Monroe? The voice was female, professional, tinged with something that sounded almost like sympathy. It's Jessica Richardson now, she corrected automatically. Who is this? Mrs. Richardson, my name is Dr. Patricia Williams. I'm calling from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. I have some news about Edward Richardson. The world tilted beneath Jessica's feet. Edward? What's wrong? Is he okay? He's stable for now, the doctor said carefully. But I think you and your husband should come in as soon as possible. There are some things we need to discuss in person. Jessica was at Alexander's office door within seconds, not bothering to knock. He looked up from his computer, his expression shifting from surprise to alarm when he saw her face. What's wrong? It's your father. We need to go to the hospital. Now. The drive to the cancer center was the longest of Jessica's life. Alexander sat rigid beside her, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. She had told him what little she knew, but neither of them had spoken since. Dr. Williams met them in the lobby and led them to a private consultation room. The walls were painted in soothing pastels, and comfortable chairs were arranged around a small table. It looked like a place where people received terrible news, and Jessica's stomach clenched with dread. I'll cut to the point, Dr. Williams said, once they were seated. Edward has pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He's known for several months, but he insisted on keeping it private. He only agreed to let me contact you today because the treatment is no longer working. Alexander had gone completely still, his face a mask of stone. Several months, he repeated. He's known for several months and didn't tell me. He wanted to protect you. He said you had finally found happiness, and he didn't want to burden you with this while you were building your new life. Burden me? Alexander's voice cracked. He's my father. How long does he have? Dr. Williams's expression softened with genuine compassion. Weeks, perhaps a month if he's lucky. I'm sorry, Mr. Richardson. We've done everything we can. The drive to Edward's hospital room was made in silence. Jessica reached for Alexander's hand, but he pulled away, lost in some private grief she couldn't touch. Edward looked smaller than she remembered. The imposing patriarch who had interrogated her over dinner seemed to have shrunk, his silver hair thinned, his commanding presence diminished by the tubes and monitors surrounding his bed. But his eyes, when they opened and found Alexander, were as sharp as ever. "You told them," he said to the doctor, his voice raspy but still carrying authority. "I asked you to wait." "You were getting worse, Edward. They needed to know. I would have told them myself in my own time." "You don't have time." Dr. Williams' voice was gentle but firm. "I'll leave you alone. Call if you need anything." The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed was suffocating. "Why?" Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have put your life on hold." Edward's eyes moved to Jessica. "Both of you would have. I've watched you these past few months, son. I've seen how happy you are. How you finally let yourself love someone. I couldn't take that away from you. So instead you chose to die alone." The words came out like a wound. "You chose to go through treatments to suffer without your family by your side. I'm a stubborn old man." A ghost of a smile crossed Edward's face. "You come by it honestly." Alexander crossed the room in 3 strides and took his father's hand. The gesture was so raw, so vulnerable, that Jessica had to look away. "I need more time," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "We need more time. There has to be something. Another doctor, an experimental treatment. I've tried them all." Edward squeezed his son's hand weakly. "This isn't giving up, Alexander. This is accepting what I cannot change and making the most of the time I have left." The weeks that followed were the hardest of Jessica's life. She watched Alexander struggle to balance work with spending every possible moment at his father's side. She watched the man she loved bear a burden that threatened to break him, and she tried desperately to be what he needed. But Alexander had shut down. The man who had opened himself to her, who had promised no more walls, had retreated behind defenses stronger than any she had seen before. He was polite, attentive, physically present but emotionally absent, lost in a grief he wouldn't let her share. "Talk to me," she begged one night, finding him standing at the window of their bedroom staring out at the city lights. "Please, Alexander, don't shut me out." "There's nothing to talk about." His voice was flat, empty. "My father is dying." "What is there to say?" "That you're scared, that you're angry, that you're hurting." She moved to stand beside him, close but not touching, afraid he would pull away. "I know what it's like to lose a parent, remember? My father. I thought I would never recover, but I did. And you will too. But not if you go through this alone." "I am alone." The words came out like a confession. "I've always been alone. My mother died when I was 6. My father sent me away to boarding school. I learned very early that the only person I could count on was myself. That was before." Jessica reached out and turned his face toward hers. "You're not alone anymore, Alexander. You have me, you have us. And whether you like it or not, I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment he just stared at her. And then, like a dam breaking, the tears came. He pulled her against him and buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking with sobs he had been holding back for weeks. Jessica held him as he fell apart, her own tears falling silently, her heart breaking for the man she loved. "I'm so scared," he whispered against her neck. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to say goodbye." "Neither do I," she admitted. "But we'll figure it out together. I promise." They stood there for what felt like hours, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 broken people holding each other up. And when Alexander finally pulled back, something had shifted in his eyes. The walls were down again. He was letting her in. "I love you," he said, his voice rough. "I don't say it enough. I don't show it enough. But I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I know." She reached up to wipe the tears from his cheeks. "I've always known." The next morning they went to the hospital together. Edward was awake, looking weaker but more peaceful than he had in days. "There you are," he said when they entered. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned me for good." "Never." Alexander took his usual seat beside the bed, but this time he reached for Jessica's hand and drew her down beside him. "Father, there's something I need to tell you." Something I should have said a long time ago. Edward raised an eyebrow. This sounds serious. It is. Alexander took a deep breath. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, for pushing me to be better, to work harder, to never settle for less than my best. I know I haven't always shown it. I know I've been angry, resentful, closed off. But the man I am today, the man who was able to build a life with this incredible woman, that's because of you. Edward's eyes glistened. Alexander, let me finish. Alexander's voice was steady now, filled with a quiet strength. I love you, Father. I should have told you that every day instead of assuming you knew. So I'm telling you now, while I still have the chance. I love you, and I'm proud to be your son. A single tear slid down Edward's weathered cheek. I love you too, son. More than you'll ever know. And I'm proud of you, of who you've become, of the life you're building. He turned his gaze to Jessica, and she saw warmth there that she had never seen before. Take care of him, Edward said. He pretends he doesn't need anyone, but he does. He needs you. And I think you need him too. I do, Jessica said softly. I'll take care of him, I promise. Edward nodded, satisfied. Good. Now stop looking so somber, both of you. I'm not dead yet, and I refuse to spend my remaining days being moped at. Tell me about the business. Tell me about your plans. Tell me about the grandchildren I expect to be produced in a timely manner. Alexander laughed, a surprised, genuine sound that made Jessica's heart soar. Always pushing, Father, even now. Especially now. Edward's smile was tired but real. Someone has to keep you on your toes. The conversation that followed was lighter, filled with business talk and family stories and plans for a future they all knew Edward wouldn't see. But there was love in that room, tangible and fierce, and Jessica knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Edward passed peacefully on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after their conversation. Alexander was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and Jessica was holding Alexander. The funeral was a massive affair, befitting a man of Edward Richardson's stature. Hundreds of mourners filled the cathedral, the same cathedral where Jessica had been abandoned at the altar, where Alexander had saved her from the wreckage of her life. She stood beside her husband as he accepted condolences from business associates and distant relatives, her hand firmly clasped in his. He was composed, controlled, every inch the Richardson heir his father had raised him to be. But Jessica could feel the slight tremor in his fingers, could see the grief lurking behind his stoic expression. When the service finally ended and the last mourner departed, they returned to the penthouse in silence. Alexander stood by the window, the same window where he had broken down in her arms weeks ago, staring out at the city his father had conquered. He left you something, Alexander said quietly. In his will. It was his idea to include you, months ago. Before we were even married, he had amended his documents. Jessica frowned. What do you mean? Alexander turned from the window, and in his hand was a small velvet box. He wanted you to have this. It was my mother's engagement ring. He said that any woman brave enough to stand up to him at dinner deserved to wear it. He opened the box, revealing a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the blue of the stone deep as the ocean. It doesn't replace the ring I gave you at the wedding, he continued, but it was important to him that you have it, that you know you were part of our family, not because of me, but because he chose you too. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she took the box from his hands. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. Alexander pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. And you've been my rock through all of this. I don't know how I would have survived these past weeks without you. You would have survived, she said softly. You're the strongest person I know. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. That's what marriage means. That's what love means. He kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring all his grief and gratitude and love into the touch of his lips against hers. When they finally pulled apart, something had shifted in his eyes. Not the pain of loss, but something brighter. Something like hope. My father asked me something before he died, Alexander said. He asked when we were going to give him grandchildren. I told him we had time. A shadow crossed his face. I was wrong. Alexander, I don't want to wait anymore, Jessica. His hands framed her face, his grey eyes intense. I've wasted so much time, 2 years watching you from a distance, months treating our marriage like a business arrangement. I don't want to waste another second. What are you saying? I'm saying I want a life with you, a real life, not just living in the same apartment, not just attending events together. I want mornings where I wake up beside you and evenings where we fall asleep tangled together. I want family dinners and holidays and arguments about whose turn it is to do dishes. His voice cracked. I want children, Jessica. Your children, our children, if you'll have me. The tears were falling freely now, but Jessica was smiling. I've wanted that since the Maldives, maybe even before. I was just too afraid to say it. No more fear, he reminded her. Remember? No more fear. He swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the master bedroom they had shared since his breakdown, since she had asked him to stay, and he had never left. Wait, she said, laughing. Shouldn't we talk about this? Make plans? You're the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Surely there are logistics to consider. The only thing I want to consider right now, Alexander said, kicking the bedroom door open, is how much I love you and how badly I want to show you. He laid her down on the silk sheets and followed her down, his body covering hers, his lips finding that sensitive spot below her ear that made her shiver. I love you, Jessica Richardson, he murmured against her skin. I've loved you since the moment I saw you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget it. I love you too, she whispered back. My husband, my hero, my home. Outside the rain had stopped, and the first rays of sunlight were breaking through the clouds. A new day was dawning over Manhattan, golden and bright and full of promise. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Alexander and Jessica began the rest of their lives. 1 year later, Jessica stood in the nursery of their Connecticut home, the estate that Edward had left to Alexander and that they had transformed into a family retreat. In her arms was their daughter, Eleanor Victoria Richardson, named for both of their mothers, sleeping peacefully with her father's dark hair and her mother's green-flecked eyes. Alexander appeared in the doorway, still in his suit from the office, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He crossed the room silently and wrapped his arms around both of them, pressing a kiss to the top of Jessica's head. She has your nose, he said softly, gazing down at their daughter. She has your stubbornness. Jessica smiled. I can already tell she's going to be a force of nature. Like her mother, like her father. They stood there in the fading light, a family they had never expected to become, a love they had never expected to find. Outside, the gardens were in full bloom, the same gardens where Edward had once walked, where someday Eleanor would play. Do you ever think about it? Alexander asked. What would have happened if Marcus hadn't left you at the altar? Every day, Jessica admitted, and every day I'm grateful that he did, because it led me to you, to this, to everything I never knew I wanted. Alexander tightened his hold on her. I would have found you eventually, I know it. We were always meant to end up here. Jessica looked down at their sleeping daughter, at the ring on her finger that had belonged to Alexander's mother, at the life they had built from the ashes of her worst day. Yes, she agreed. We were. Eleanor stirred in her arms, yawning widely before settling back into sleep. Alexander reached down and gently stroked their daughter's cheek, his expression soft with a love that would have seemed impossible from the cold, distant CEO she had once known. Come to bed, he said. Both of you, it's been a long day. Jessica leaned into him, letting his strength support her weight. Lead the way, Mr. Richardson. Always, Mrs. Richardson. They walked out of the nursery together, their daughter cradled safely between them, and closed the door softly behind them.